Welcome back to Wives Gone Wild. We appreciate you being here. Where are you watching from today? We love knowing how these wild tales reach you. Let's dive into today's cheating wife story. That night, I sat in the living room, the dim glow of the clock on the wall marking every passing minute. Midnight had come and gone, yet the front door remained shut. Samantha had told me she was going out with her friends, that she needed a break. But something in my gut told me there was more to it than just a casual night out. Then, finally, the door creaked open. I turned my head and saw her standing there, hair disheveled as if she had been through a storm, clothes hanging loosely, frayed at the edges. But it wasn't just her appearance that made my stomach twist. It was something else. There was a faint, unmistakable dampness on her thighs. I froze. The air around her carried a scent I couldn't ignore. Cologne. Not hers. Not mine. Someone else's. A stranger's. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The way she swayed slightly, the way her glassy eyes struggled to focus on me. Drunk. Sloppy. But there was something else in her expression, something more than just intoxication. It was guilt. I stepped forward, my voice careful, controlled. "Samantha, what happened?" She blinked at me, unfocused, her lips parting, but no words came out at first. Then, in a slurred whisper, she mumbled. "It didn't mean anything, just once. I'm sorry, just once." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not while she was like this. Swallowing down the lump in my throat, I forced myself to move. I took her by the arm, guiding her towards the bedroom. She leaned against me, her body heavy, her breath reeking of alcohol and bad decisions. As I pulled the blanket over her, my mind raced. What had she done? How far had she gone? My heart pleaded with me to hope, to believe there was an explanation I could live with. But deep down, my gut whispered the truth. Something had happened, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive it. Tomorrow, when the alcohol wore off, I was going to get my answers. But I had a feeling I wasn't ready for what I was about to hear. Morning came, but sleep never did. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the cold coffee in my hands, my mind replaying the night before like a broken record. The words, the smell, the dampness on her thighs, the slurred confession that had shattered something inside me. Upstairs, I heard the rustle of sheets, the groan of someone waking up from a night they'd rather forget. Samantha was stirring. Any minute now, she would come downstairs, unaware of the storm waiting for her. I wasn't ready for this. Then, I heard the soft shuffle of feet. She walked into the kitchen, still in the same wrinkled clothes from last night. Her hair was a mess, her eyes swollen, and she winced as if every step sent a hammer through her skull. A hangover. The price of bad decisions. She looked at me, confused at first, until she saw what was on the table. The photos. I had taken them last night, my hands shaking as I documented what I couldn't yet process. The faint but visible stains on her dress. The subtle imprint of a hand near her waist. Proof. Unforgiving, undeniable proof. Her face went pale. I set my coffee down and looked at her, my voice quiet but firm. "Do you even remember what you did last night?" Samantha's breath hitched. I saw it in her eyes. The panic, the guilt, the desperate scramble to piece together her fragmented memory. She didn't need to ask what I meant. She already knew. Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then, in a whisper, she choked out, "I'm sorry." Sorry. A word that once meant something. A word that should have brought relief. But now, it was empty, meaningless. I exhaled, shaking my head. A mistake, right? That's what you're going to tell me. She flinched. Tears welled in her eyes as she rushed to explain, to justify, to make sense of the senseless. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything. But I wasn't having it. Not this time. You don't just trip and fall into this, Samantha. My voice was cold, steady. You made a choice. You walked into that bar. You got drunk, and you let another man put his hands on you. Her tears spilled over. She clutched the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. I scoffed. But it did. That was the part she didn't understand. This wasn't just about what happened last night. It was about what it had done to us, to everything we had built, to every moment I had trusted her. She wasn't just apologizing to me. She was apologizing to herself, trying to convince herself she wasn't the villain in her own story. But I couldn't be the one to make her feel better. I pushed my chair back and stood up, my heart a solid weight in my chest. I need some air. Her mouth opened, maybe to plead, maybe to beg, but I didn't stay to hear it. I turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the wreckage she had created. And for the first time, I wondered if I would ever come back. You can't just let something like this go. Not when your trust has been shattered. Not when every fiber of your being is screaming for the truth. I tried. God knows I tried to push it down, to silence the questions clawing at my mind. But they wouldn't stop. Who was he? Why her? And most of all, how long had this been going on? Samantha's drunken confession had been vague, fragmented, but it had given me just enough to follow. A name. Adam. That was all I needed. It didn't take long to find him. Social media makes it easy to connect the dots when you're motivated. And I was. Adam was exactly the kind of man I had expected. Clean-cut, successful, the type who knew how to charm his way into anything. The kind of guy who walked into a room and commanded attention. But it wasn't his perfectly curated online presence that caught my attention. It was something much worse. Samantha followed him, and he followed her back. This wasn't some random, faceless stranger. This wasn't an accident. They knew each other. And then came the real gut punch. Adam was married. Not just married. He had kids. A perfect little family plastered all over his Instagram. Pictures of them on vacation, celebrating birthdays, cozy Sunday mornings in matching pajamas. He looked like the kind of man who had it all. But then again, so did I. And look where that got me. The more I looked, the more everything started to click into place. This wasn't just a stupid, drunken mistake. This wasn't something that just happened. I needed to know how deep this went. Samantha's phone became my next target. She didn't know I was watching, but I had to know everything. Late at night, when she was fast asleep, I took it. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen, my stomach twisted in knots, already knowing I wasn't going to like what I found. And I was right. The messages were short, casual, but damning. Adam knew she would be at the bar that night. They had talked about it. A few light exchanges, just enough to set the stage. He showed up because he knew she'd be there. This wasn't random. It was planned. Maybe not in so many words, but enough to make one thing clear. They both knew exactly what they were doing. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as rage and heartbreak tangled inside me. That night, I made a decision. Adam's wife deserved to know the truth. She deserved to know what kind of man she was married to. And once I was done with him, I was turning my focus back to the woman who had vowed to love me. The divorce papers were already being prepared. But before I walked away, I needed closure. And I was going to get it. I debated for hours. Was it my place to tell her? Would I just be making things worse? Some might say it wasn't my business, that I should just walk away and focus on my own pain. But I knew one thing for certain. She deserved to know. Charlotte, Adam's wife. She had no idea what kind of man she was sharing a bed with. No idea that while she was home, trusting him, loving him, he had been out destroying everything they had built together. Just like Samantha had done to me. I worded my message carefully. No anger. No accusations. Just the facts. Charlotte, I know this is difficult, but I need to speak with you. It's about your husband. Please, meet me. You deserve to know the truth. She replied the same day. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. A place where emotions wouldn't spiral out of control. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window. She looked normal, composed, even. Dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, a soft sweater hugging her frame. She didn't look like someone about to have her world shattered. I almost felt guilty. Almost. She looked up as I approached, offering a polite, uncertain smile. You must be Brad. I nodded and sat down, my fingers tightening around the folder in my hands. I didn't want to do this, but I had to. I didn't sugarcoat it. Your husband had an affair with my wife. Her smile vanished. She blinked at me, her lips parting slightly, as if she hadn't really heard what I just said. For a moment, she just sat there, frozen, her coffee cup shaking in her hands. I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. Inside were the screenshots, the messages, the photos from that night, and, most damning of all, a recording of Samantha's confession, her drunken voice mumbling his name, over and over. Charlotte's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. Her face paled. Her breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She just stared, as if willing the evidence to disappear. Finally, she spoke. her voice barely above a whisper. How long? I shook my head. I don't know. But it wasn't a mistake. He knew she would be there that night. They planned it. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, after what felt like forever, she exhaled sharply and closed the folder. Thank you for telling me. That was it. No screaming. No outrage. Just quiet devastation. I nodded and stood up. There was nothing left to say. As I walked out of that cafe, a strange mix of emotions churned inside me. Anger, relief, guilt. I had done what I set out to do. I had told her the truth. But the truth doesn't heal wounds. It only exposes them. And now, it was time to turn my focus back to the woman who had shattered my world. Samantha tried everything. At first, it was the tears. She cried every day, pleaded with me, begged me to listen. Please, Brad. It was a mistake. I love you. Just give me a chance to make this right. But every time I looked at her, all I saw was the shadow of what she had done. The late-night messages, the smell of another man's cologne, the slurred confession that still echoed in my mind. She left notes for me, scraps of paper tucked into my jacket, under my pillow. I love you. I'll never hurt you again. Please, don't give up on us. At first, I read them. Then I stopped. She cooked dinner every night. My favorite meals. Set the table like nothing had changed. But everything had. I couldn't sit across from her. Couldn't pretend that the woman who had broken my heart was the same one who once held it so carefully. One evening, she cornered me in the living room. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice hoarse from days of begging. Please, Brad, she whispered. I love you. I'll do anything to fix this. I finally looked at her, really looked at her, and I said the words that had been sitting on my tongue for days. I don't think so. She flinched, as if I had struck her. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, sobbing, clutching her chest like she was in physical pain. And maybe she was. Maybe, for the first time, she was feeling even a fraction of what I had felt since that night. For days, the house was a silent battlefield. No shouting, no screaming, just an unbearable, suffocating weight between us. I had hoped, God, I had hoped, that maybe the quiet would bring clarity, that maybe I could find a way to forgive her. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Some things can't be repaired. Some wounds don't heal. So I spent my days tying up loose ends, sorting out bank accounts, reviewing documents, preparing for the inevitable. Then, one morning, I walked into the living room, where Samantha sat, staring at the floor. She looked up when she heard me. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. I held the papers in my hands, and for a moment, I hesitated. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew this was the moment everything truly ended. You made your choice that night, I said, my voice calm but final. This is mine. I placed the divorce papers on the table. She sucked in a sharp breath, as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. Brad, no. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. We can fix this. I'll do anything. She fell to her knees, clutching at my hand, sobbing so hard I thought she might choke on her own breath. Don't do this, she begged. Please don't throw us away. But the truth was, she had already thrown us away. That night, in a moment of selfishness, she had destroyed everything we had built. And without trust, without respect, what were we? I pulled my hand away, gently but firmly. I can't, I said, shaking my head. I've tried, Sam. I've thought about it every way I could. But I can't look at you the same. I can't look at us the same. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words were final. I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the floor. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to touch the bed. I slept on the couch because the bedroom smelled too much like her, like memories I didn't want to relive. Every night, I stared at the ceiling, haunted by the echoes of a life that no longer existed. But slowly, things started to change. I stopped looking at the empty spaces she used to fill and started seeing possibilities instead. I replaced the furniture, rearranged the living room, painted the walls a different color. It wasn't just about making the house feel different. It was about making it mine again. I wasn't just rebuilding a home. I was rebuilding me. The cracks she left, the scars, they didn't go away. But they started to hurt less. And in their place, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Samantha? I don't know what became of her after the divorce. We stopped talking once the papers were signed. But I heard things. She tried to move on. She struggled. Some people said she regretted it every day. that she never really recovered. Maybe that's true. Maybe she finally understood what she had lost. But me? I found something better. I found myself. Betrayal isn't just about broken trust. It's about the loss of who you thought you were with someone. It forces you to look at yourself in ways you never expected. But here's the thing. Healing doesn't come from waiting for time to fix it. It comes from choosing yourself, from standing up, stepping forward, and saying, I deserve more. Have you ever had to walk away from something you thought would last forever? Tell us your story in the comments. We're listening.